October 732 AD. Somewhere between the cities of Tours and Poitiers in what is now central France, two armies are facing each other across open ground. One of them has been moving for 3 years without stopping, across the Strait of Gibraltar, up through the Iberian Peninsula, over the Pyrenees, and deep into the Frankish heartland. It has not lost a battle. It has not met a force capable of slowing it down. It carries the momentum of a civilization expanding at a speed that has no precedent in the history of the known world. In 100 years, the faith it carries has gone from a small community in the Arabian Peninsula to the dominant power from the Atlantic coast of Spain to the borders of China. Nothing has stopped it. Nothing has even seriously tried. The other army is Frankish, a coalition of Germanic warriors assembled in haste by a leader whose official title is not even king. Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, is the mayor of the palace, the real power behind a weak Merovingian throne, a man who has spent his entire career fighting internal Frankish civil wars and has never faced anything like what is standing across the field from him now. What happens in the next 7 days will determine whether Europe becomes Christian or Muslim, whether the churches of Paris and Rome survive or are converted into mosques, whether the intellectual tradition of Greek philosophy reaches the modern world through a Latin Christian filter or an Arabic Islamic one, whether the economic and political structures of Western civilization develop along the lines they historically do, or along entirely different lines that nobody can now predict or reconstruct. It is not an exaggeration. The historians who have analyzed this battle across 13 centuries are in broad agreement. Tours is one of the most consequential military engagements in human history, and almost nobody outside France knows it happened. To understand what is standing across the field from Charles Martel in 732, it is necessary to understand what the Islamic expansion actually is, not as theology, but as a political and economic phenomenon moving at a speed that the 7th and 8th century world cannot process. The Prophet Muhammad dies in 632 AD. At the moment of his death, Islam controls the Arabian Peninsula and nothing else. Within 10 years, the Arab armies have conquered Persia, taken Syria, seized Egypt, and destroyed the Byzantine army at the Battle of Yarmouk in a single engagement so decisive that the Eastern Roman Empire never fully recovers. The speed is not mystical. It has structural explanations. The Arab warriors fighting under the banner of Islam in the first century of expansion are not a conscript army. They are volunteers, men motivated by genuine religious conviction, by the promise of paradise for those who die in God's cause, and by something more immediate and material, the plunder and tribute that flow from conquered territories. The Islamic State's fiscal system at this period channels a significant share of conquest revenues back to the warriors who made the conquest possible. Jihad is simultaneously a religious obligation and a profitable career. The incentive structure is aligned in a way that produces extraordinary military energy. The armies they are destroying are the exhausted remnants of two empires, Byzantine and Sassanid Persian, that have been fighting each other continuously for a generation before the Arabs arrive. The Byzantine-Sassanid War of 602 to 628 AD has bled both empires of men, money, and administrative capacity to a degree that leaves them structurally unable to resist a fresh, highly motivated force. The Arab expansion does not defeat strong empires. It walks through empires that have already broken themselves against each other. By 670, Islam controls all of North Africa. By 711, the Arab general Tariq ibn Ziyad crosses from Morocco to Spain with 7,000 warriors, defeats the Visigothic king Roderick at the Battle of Guadalete, and begins the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. Within 7 years, all of Spain south of the Pyrenees is under Islamic control. The Visigoths, the Germanic people who have ruled Spain for 2 centuries, are gone. Their kingdom collapses so completely that historians still debate what exactly happened to them. The momentum does not stop at the Pyrenees. It never has stopped anywhere. 721 AD. The Arab governor of Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, leads his first major raid across the Pyrenees into Frankish territory. He reaches the city of Toulouse and lays siege to it. The Frankish Duke of Aquitaine, Odo, fights back and defeats the Arab force, the first significant Arab military defeat in the West. But it is a single engagement. The pressure does not stop. The Islamic expansion into Gaul is not simply a military operation. It is an economic extraction campaign. The great Christian cities of southern France, Narbonne, Carcassonne, Arles, hold wealth accumulated over centuries of Roman and Frankish rule. Their churches contain gold, silver, and relics of extraordinary value. Their populations are productive farmers and craftspeople. Their harbors handle Mediterranean trade. An Islamic Gaul connected to the Al-Andalus economy and the broader Islamic trade network stretching east to Persia and Central Asia would be an extraordinary commercial prize. The man who leads the 732 invasion is Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi, the governor of Al-Andalus. He is not a raider, he is an experienced administrator and military commander who has assembled a large professional force, Arab cavalry, Berber infantry, veteran soldiers who have fought across 3 continents. His army crosses the Pyrenees in 732 and moves north with a specific target in mind, the Abbey of Saint Martin at Tours, one of the wealthiest religious establishments in Western Europe, whose treasuries hold gold accumulated over 2 centuries of Frankish royal patronage. Tours is not just spiritually significant, it is the richest single target in Gaul. Abd al-Rahman is moving toward it with the same commercial logic that has driven the Islamic expansion everywhere else. Conquest produces tribute. Tribute funds the next campaign. The next campaign produces more tribute. The system is self-financing and self-accelerating. It has worked from Arabia to Spain. There is no obvious reason it will not work from Spain to France. Duke Odo of Aquitaine tries to stop him at the Garonne River and is destroyed. His army is shattered. He flees north. He does the one thing he has spent years avoiding. He asks Charles Martel for help. Charles Martel is 50 years old in 732 and has been fighting continuously since his 20s. He is the illegitimate son of Pepin of Herstal, the previous mayor of the palace, who governed the Frankish kingdom in the name of the weak Merovingian kings. When Pepin died in 714, his legitimate heirs and their supporters imprisoned Charles and fought to keep him out of power. Charles escaped. He raised an army from his supporters, fought a 6-year civil war, and emerged in 719 as the undisputed master of the Frankish realm. He is not a king. The Merovingian figurehead still occupies the throne, but Charles controls the treasury, the army, and the appointments. He is the Frankish state in every meaningful sense. He has also been doing something that nobody else in the Frankish world has attempted. He has been building a heavy cavalry force. The standard Frankish army of this period is predominantly infantry, Germanic warriors fighting on foot with axes, spears, and shields, effective in the forests and river valleys of northern Europe, but slow, inflexible, and vulnerable to mounted assault on open ground. Charles has seen what Arab cavalry can do. He understands that meeting it with infantry alone is a losing proposition on the kind of flat terrain that cavalry requires to be decisive. The resource he needs to build cavalry is land. Horses are expensive. Training mounted warriors takes years. Equipping them with the armor, weapons, and mounts that make heavy cavalry effective requires a financial base that most Frankish lords do not possess. Charles solves this problem with an instrument that will shape European feudalism for 5 centuries. He seizes church lands and distributes them to warriors in exchange for military service, specifically cavalry service. The church is furious. The Pope objects. Charles ignores them. He needs cavalry, the church has land, and the threat coming from the south is more immediately dangerous than ecclesiastical displeasure. The land transfers happen. The cavalry is built. The system Charles creates, land in exchange for mounted military service, is the prototype of feudalism, and it is built specifically to counter the Islamic military threat. By the time Abd al-Rahman crosses the Pyrenees in 732, Charles has an army that can fight mounted forces on open ground. It is not the army he wants. He has not had enough time, and the crisis has arrived faster than his preparations. But it is an army unlike anything the Islamic commanders have faced in Gaul. Charles moves south to intercept Abd al-Rahman before he reaches Tours. He chooses his ground with care, a position between the Claine and Vienne rivers where the terrain limits the effectiveness of cavalry by narrowing the frontage and providing forested flanks that Arab horsemen cannot easily exploit. He places his infantry in a dense defensive formation, the shield wall, on ground that forces the Arab cavalry to charge uphill into a solid mass of armored Franks rather than sweeping around the flanks. The two armies spend several days watching each other. Abd al-Rahman probes the Frankish position, looking for weaknesses. Charles does not oblige him. He holds his formation, keeps his men on the high ground, and waits. The Arab cavalry charges when it charges, and it charges repeatedly, the horsemen breaking against the Frankish shield wall like water against stone. The Franks are not a mobile force, they are a wall. The Arab cavalry is devastating in open pursuit, lethal against infantry formations that break and run. Against a formation that does not break, that absorbs the charge and fights back with organized ferocity, it loses the advantage that has made it unstoppable everywhere else. The battle lasts 7 days, not a single engagement but a grinding week of repeated Arab assaults against the Frankish position, with neither side achieving a decisive breakthrough. On the 7th day, something changes. A rumor spreads through the Arab army that Frankish cavalry, Charles's force of mounted warriors held in reserve, has circled around and is attacking the Arab camp. The camp holds not just supplies, but the plunder accumulated during the entire Gaul campaign: gold, silver, and goods taken from towns and churches all the way from the Pyrenees. The Arab warriors who hear the rumor break off the assault and turn back toward the camp to protect their share of the plunder. The plunder is the mechanism of the Islamic expansion. It is what brings men to fight, what funds the next campaign, what holds the coalition together. When the plunder is threatened, the military logic that makes the army function unravels faster than any tactical defeat could produce. Abd al-Rahman rides into the breaking mass of his own army, trying to restore order. He is surrounded, he is killed. His army retreats south overnight. When the Franks survey the field in the morning, the Arab camp is abandoned. The horses are gone, the plunder is gone, the army is gone. Charles Martel surveys what is left and earns the name by which history will know him: the Hammer. The Abbey of Saint-Martin at Tours is untouched. Its gold remains in its treasury. The Christian ecclesiastical network of northern France, the monasteries, the scriptoria, the libraries where monks are copying Greek and Latin texts, the schools where classical learning is being transmitted to the next generation, survives. This survival is not a small thing. The monasteries of 8th century Europe are not simply religious institutions, they are the repositories of the entire intellectual inheritance of the ancient world. The texts of Aristotle, Plato, Cicero, Virgil, the accumulated philosophical, scientific, and literary achievement of Greece and Rome, exist in this period almost exclusively in monastery libraries. The monks who copy them are not scholars in the modern sense. They are craftsmen doing a job, producing books for liturgical and educational use, but the copying preserves what would otherwise be lost. An Islamic Gaul would not necessarily have destroyed this inheritance. The Islamic world of the 8th century is actively translating and preserving Greek philosophical texts, and the great libraries of Baghdad and Cordoba will eventually hold more classical learning than any Christian institution of the same period. But it would have transmitted that inheritance through a different filter into a different intellectual tradition, producing a different civilization on the other side of the medieval period. What exactly that civilization would have looked like is impossible to know. What is knowable is that the civilization that actually emerged from the European Middle Ages, with its specific synthesis of Christian theology, Roman law, and Greek philosophy, required the survival of the Frankish ecclesiastical network that Tours made possible. The economic consequences of the Frankish victory are equally significant. The Islamic trade network that would have connected an Islamic Gaul to Al-Andalus, North Africa, and the Eastern Mediterranean would have oriented European commerce toward the south and east, toward the great urban markets of the Islamic world rather than toward the northern sea routes that actually develop in the following centuries. The Viking trade networks, the Hanseatic League, the Atlantic commercial system that eventually produces the Age of Exploration. All of these depend on a northern European economic development that proceeds along Christian Frankish lines rather than Islamic ones. Tours does not simply save Christian churches. It determines the direction of European economic development for the next 5 centuries. Charles Martel dies in 741 AD, 9 years after Tours. He has spent those 9 years consolidating Frankish power, pushing Arab forces back across the Pyrenees, and building the feudal military structure that his victory at Tours has demonstrated is necessary. He never takes the title of king. He governs to the end as mayor of the palace, the power behind a Merovingian throne that has no real occupant for the last years of his life. His son, Pepin the Short, finally deposes the last Merovingian king in 751 with papal blessing, and becomes the first Carolingian king of the Franks. His grandson is Charlemagne, Charles the Great, who will build the Carolingian Empire across most of Western Europe, be crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope in 800 AD, and create the political and cultural framework from which modern France, Germany, and Italy eventually emerge. The lineage runs directly from Tours. Charles Martel's seizure of church lands to fund cavalry, his victory against the Islamic expansion, his construction of the feudal military system, these are the foundations on which Charlemagne builds. The empire Charlemagne creates is, in the most direct sense, the product of what happened between the Clain and Vienne rivers in October 732. The Islamic world does not disappear from Western history after Tours. Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, remains a sophisticated, wealthy, and culturally extraordinary civilization for another 7 centuries, producing philosophers, mathematicians, and physicians whose work will eventually flow back into Christian Europe through translation and reshape Western intellectual life. The interaction between Islamic and Christian civilization in the medieval period is not a story of simple opposition. It is a story of competition, exchange, and mutual influence conducted across a boundary that Tours helps to define. But the boundary holds. The expansion that had moved from Arabia to the Atlantic in 100 years stops in central France and does not resume its westward momentum. The civilization that develops north of that boundary, feudal, Christian, Frankish, eventually European in the modern sense, develops along the lines that Tours makes possible. Tours is not taught in most European schools outside France. It does not appear in the standard curricula of British, American, or German history education with the prominence its consequences deserve. The Battle of Hastings in 1066, which changed who ruled England, is universally known. Tours in 732, which arguably determined what civilization would develop across all of Western Europe, is almost entirely absent from popular historical consciousness. The reasons for this absence are partly political. Acknowledging Tours requires acknowledging the Islamic expansion as a genuine existential threat to European Christian civilization, a framing that sits uncomfortably with modern sensibilities about cultural relativism and the equivalence of civilizations. It is easier, in the contemporary intellectual climate, to minimize the stakes of the battle than to engage with what its outcome actually meant. But the stakes were real. The men who fought on both sides knew what was at stake. Abd al-Rahman knew he was carrying the expansion of a faith and an empire into new territory. Charles Martel knew he was defending a civilization whose continued existence he could not take for granted. The outcome was not predetermined. It was decided by the choices those men made about ground, about timing, about the organization of military force in 7 days in October that the world has mostly forgotten. The hammer fell. Europe stayed Christian. The libraries survived. The texts were copied. The civilization continued along the lines that produced everything that came after it. 7 days. One battle. Almost nobody teaches it.